my dear students. I'm Dr. Vaishaly Bharambe. I've been teaching anatomy for last 25 years and I love it. This lecture is a part of my Central Nervous System series. Spinal Cord Part 1, the link for which is given in the description section, consists of where is spinal cord, what surrounds spinal cord, what protects spinal cord, what is attached to spinal cord. In today's lecture, we are now going to dive into the spinal cord. So what is grey matter? What are parts of grey matter? How does it work? What is white matter? What are parts of white matter? How does white matter work? And what is central canal? Basically, internal organization of your spinal cord is today's lecture. Okay? So let's begin. For this, I want you to first quickly run through the neuron. Taught you in your standard 7th, and I'm confident you still remember it. So here you're looking at a neuron, which is the structural and functional unit of the nervous system. Here I have zoomed in on the body of the neuron, which you can see consists of a nucleus and a cytoplasm. Cytoplasm contains mitochondria, smooth endoplasmic reticulum, rough endoplasmic reticulum with Nissel's granules, Golgi apparatus, neurofilaments, neurotubules, and so on. Why am I mentioning this? I'm not going to teach it, right? But you must know about it. What happens when suddenly in a neuron you don't see Nissel's granules? What is the meaning of that? Okay, something is definitely wrong with the neuron if the Nissel's granules begin to reduce. Okay, or they come back. Is the neuron recovering? For that, knowing the microscopy of the neuron is important. As you know, neuron gives rise to a number of projections. Small projections, long projections. Small projections called dendrite, long projection called as an axon. Right. So let's come to this image and understand that a neuron receives and the neuron gives away. It receives impulses and becomes aware of its surrounding through dendrites. It receives impulses through dendrites and then it thinks, what shall I do now? Gives out its impulse through an axon. Receives through dendrites, leaves the impulse leaves the neuron through an axon. Remember this, very basic, I'm sure you knew it, but I feel it's my duty to make you go through this once. Right, some more basics. Suppose there are a lot of bodies of neurons which are packed together tightly. Inside the central nervous system, I will call it a nucleus. A collection of neurons tightly packed in the CNS is called as nucleus. If the same thing happens outside the CNS, it's called as a ganglion. Remember the sympathetic ganglion, the dorsal root ganglion, and so on. These are collections of neurons. But are they in the CNS? No, they are outside CNS. Collections of axons. Collection of neurons we've done. So axons also can get collected. Inside the CNS, they form a tract. Please say it once. Inside the CNS, they form a tract. Outside the CNS, they form a nerve. Got it? If the axons come out of the spinal cord, okay, they form a nerve. But inside the spinal cord, they form a tract. So these are basics you must know. Let's now dive into spinal cord part 2. What does the spinal cord look like inside? Right. So a section of spinal cord, please. You're seeing this is the anterior median fissure, posterior median sulcus, and a septum extending inwards. You can see that there is an anterolateral sulcus here, and that's where the ventral root of spinal nerve is attached. Here's the posterolateral sulcus where the dorsal root of spinal nerve is attached. They are obviously present on both sides. In the center, there's a central canal surrounded by H-shaped grey matter, further surrounded by white matter. This is basic of spinal cord. I'm sure you knew this. Right. Add a little bit more now. This is the H-shaped grey matter which consists of 3 horns. Seeing, okay, posterior grey horn, lateral grey horn, and anterior grey horn, or sometimes called as column, because they're basically a column of grey matter. So posterior grey horn, lateral grey horn, anterior grey horn, 3 parts of grey matter seen on both sides of spinal cord, connected to each other with the help of what is called as the grey commissure. What is it called? Grey commissure. This is the white matter now, divided into 3 parts. Okay, Posterior to the posterolateral sulcus and attachment of dorsal root is the posterior funiculus. Between the attachment of dorsal root and ventral root is the lateral funiculus, and anterior to the attachment of ventral root of spinal nerve is the anterior funiculus. So, white matter again on both sides, 3 bundles: posterior funiculus, lateral funiculus, anterior funiculus. What are we going to do now? We are going to study each of these a little bit more in detail. So, you have got your grey matter, anterior, lateral, posterior grey horn. You got your white matter, anterior, lateral, posterior funiculus. Right? Ready? Let's begin. Let's discuss first the grey matter. The little grey cells. If anybody has been watching Agatha Christie, and if you've been reading what my dear Pyro says, he says the little grey cells. So that's what we're going to talk about. What is grey matter made up of? It looks grey, it looks dense, we call it grey matter. What is different about it? See, it's made up of neurons, neuroglia and blood vessels, whereas the white matter is made up of fibers, neuroglia and blood vessels. Okay, so all the neuronal bodies lie in the grey matter. Okay, so the body of the neuron will be found here. So you can see how there are a collection of neurons here. So grey matter is made up of bodies of neurons supported by neuroglia and blood vessels. Right. So the grey matter, so you can classify the neurons as large, small, Golgi type 1, Golgi type 2. According to their function, you can always say that a neuron is motor in its functioning or it's sensory in its functioning. It could be carrying modalities up to the brain. It could be carrying the order of from the cortex and extending it to the distal part of the body. So it could be motor, bringing about movement. It could be sensory, carrying sensation back to the brain. So the lateral horn and anterior horn are consisting of motor neurons. The posterior horn is consisting of sensory neurons and interneurons. Okay, we'll learn a lot more about this later. Neuroglia are cells that support the neurons in whatever way they can. I'm not going to discuss this any further. So now let's talk about what's the nucleus. Do you remember we've done this earlier? A packed collection of neurons in the CNS is called as a nucleus. So in the spinal cord, neurons can get collected tightly to form collections of neurons called as nucleus. For example, here is one nucleus. Neurons have got packed together, they are not far apart. They are packed together, they form a nucleus. So, concept of nuclei in grey matter. Neurons collect in grey matter to form nuclei like I just said. Take a look. Here's the grey matter, edge-shaped, and you can see there are so many collections, tiny collections of neurons to form nuclei. Each of these is a nucleus. We are going to name it, we are going to discuss it. Okay. So many neurons and so many nuclei. Revise what you've learned. I know that the grey matter is edge-shaped. It has got anterior, lateral and posterior horn. Each is having collections of neurons which are collected to form nuclei. Okay. We also know that grey matter is made up of neurons, neuroglia and blood vessels. Now suppose I want to talk about a particular part of grey matter. Suppose I want to talk about this part of grey matter. What will I say? Posterior horn? Then the whole thing is posterior horn. How will I come to a particular area in grey matter? So what they've done is they've kind of labeled it off. Take a look. The anterior grey column can consist of a head and a base. So the damage to the spinal cord could be to the head, it could be to the base. Or the posterior grey column has an apex, a neck, a head and a base. So now you can say, okay, the damage is to the base or the damage is to the apex. This is just a way of pointing out to a particular region in the grey matter. Okay. This is just a brief introduction. Let's continue with our discussion now on the grey matter. So anterior grey horn. I can see that it is this part made up of a lot of nuclei. Ma'am, I can see 6 nuclei. Yeah, you're right. So all these the neurons here are large neurons. They're not small. They're large multipolar neurons and their They are called as lower motor neurons. I want you to say this once. What are they called? Lower motor neurons. And they are a motor part of the functioning of spinal cord. They are motor part of the functioning of spinal cord. They are going to bring about actions. They are going to receive an order from the brain. They are going to understand it and they are going to bring about action. For example, now my brain says, lift your hand. Who did it? The lower motor neuron, which was controlling the movement of my hand. It caused this movement. Okay. So, anterior horn consists of lower motor neurons. They represent the motor part of grey matter of spinal cord. Which nuclei are there in the anterior horn? They are collected into 3 groups. Take a look. Medial group, lateral group and a central group. The medial group gives rise to nerves which supply the trunk. Okay? So, abdominal muscles, thoracic muscles and so on. The lateral group consists of nerves which supply the arm, forearm, hand or the thigh, leg and foot. So, basically supply the extremities. What about central group? Central group, when present, supplies muscles of diaphragm. Got it? So, basically you saw we've covered almost all the muscles of the body because the head neck region is supplied by cranial nerves, upper limb, lower limb by lateral group and the trunk by medial group and the diaphragm by central group. You've covered them all, isn't it? So, that's how the anterior horn of spinal cord supplies the muscles of the body. Let's understand it just once more with the help of an animation. Imagine that your cortex has sent an order down to the spinal cord. The spinal cord receives it through the lateral corticospinal tract. This order is conveyed to the neuron lying in the anterior grey horn. This is the body of the neuron here. Its axon now emerges out, passes through the ventral root, passes through the spinal nerve, helping to form the spinal nerve and finally supplies the muscle and the muscle contracts. Got it? Who gave the order? Cortex. Through which tract? Lateral corticospinal tract. Who was stimulated? The neuron lying in the anterior grey horn. Who went and touched the muscle? The axon of that neuron, helping to form the spinal nerve and finally supplying the muscle, causing the muscle to contract. Got it? This is how anterior horn neurons work. Right. So, what's an interneuron? Just a small extra knowledge I am giving you. Same thing. Cortex has given an order, it has reached down through the lateral corticospinal tract. But instead of giving the information directly to the anterior horn, it gives the information to a neuron in the posterior grey horn, which then carries the impulse to the neuron in the anterior grey horn, which then carries it, reaches it to the muscle. So, this little neuron which connected the two is called as an interneuron. Interneuron is basically a connector. Bus. We are not going to talk more about it. I think you have got it. Right. So, now we are done with the anterior horn. Let's go to the lateral horn. We know that is also a motor part of the grey matter of spinal cord. You can see that it is having 2 groups, an intermediolateral and an intermediomedial. Remember that these 2 nuclei are part of the autonomic nervous system. 1. They are only seen in thoracic and upper lumbar region, not anywhere else. 2 very important facts. Pause. Why don't you drink some water? Let me also, see, we should always give ourselves short breaks. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to take in so much data. Pause. Think. Where are we? We've finished the anterior horn of grey matter. We are now in the lateral horn of grey matter. So, the lateral horn consists of intermediolateral and intermediomedial. The intermediolateral has got neurons that act as preganglionic neurons for sympathetic system. Oh my God, what is this? Isn't it? What is madam talking about? Why is she talking about it? I'll tell you, it's fun actually. Just remember the word preganglionic. It's preganglionic part of the sympathetic system. Intermediomedial is the preganglionic part of the parasympathetic system. Just remember that. Let's come to the next image and you will be surprised how quickly you will understand what I am saying. Right. So here's your spinal cord. Here's your sympathetic chain with the sympathetic ganglion. So something is before this ganglion, preganglionic. Something is after this ganglion, postganglionic. Before this ganglion, preganglionic. After this ganglion, postganglionic. Got it? So here's your neuron lying in the lateral gray horn. It receives some order. Okay. Accordingly, its axon travels to the ventral root through the spinal nerve and finally relays in the adjacent sympathetic ganglion. So it is before the ganglion. So this is a preganglionic neuron. After relaying in the ganglion, postganglionic fibers will go to my blood vessels, will go to a muscle and cause the muscle to contract. Supposing you saw something, there is a lot of heat, okay. Suddenly your blood vessels will dilate, you will begin to look red. Who is doing all this? It's the sympathetic system, okay, which is causing everything, the blood vessels to dilate and cause your arm to look red. Where did it get the order? From the lateral horn, okay. The preganglionic fiber went from here, relayed in the sympathetic ganglion. Postganglionic fiber went to the muscle or went to the blood vessel and brought about the action. Sometimes these axons may not relay in that ganglion. They may go up, they may go down and relay in higher or lower sympathetic ganglia. They are still preganglionic, but they are relaying at a higher ganglion or relaying in a lower ganglion. Or they may not relay at all and they may just go into the abdomen and bring about their action there. So that is how the neuron sitting in the lateral horn is bringing about its action as a part of sympathetic or parasympathetic system. Okay. Now, so we're done with the motor part of spinal cord. Anterior horn motor bringing about action. Lateral horn motor bringing about the actions of sympathetic and parasympathetic system. But then what is the posterior horn doing? Posterior horn consists of nuclei again, but it's essentially made up of neurons which give rise to tracts, neurons which act as interneurons supported by neuroglia and blood vessels. So, this posterior horn neurons are acting as the sensory part of grey matter of spinal cord. What is sensory? Receiving. This part of the spinal cord is going to receive information. If I am sitting here and I feel that this table is hurting my elbow, how is my brain finding out? The information is being transmitted from here to the posterior horn of my spinal cord, which is then giving rise to a tract, which is relaying this information in my opposite side cortex. Got it? So, posterior horn is essentially the sensory part of my spinal cord. It is doing the job of receiving. So, what are the nuclei I find in the posterior horn? I find substantia gelatinosa of Rolando, nucleus proprius, visceral afferent nucleus, and nucleus dorsalis, also called Clark's column. Please note, nucleus dorsalis is present only between C8 and L2. You might find your books giving a little, say they could make it L2 can be made L1. There is a little variation between what I am telling you and what some other books give you. So, 4 types of nuclei seen in the posterior grey horn. How does the posterior grey horn work? You're going to enjoy this. Okay, just get ready. Imagine that a person has felt pain. Say I have felt pain in the tip of my finger. When I touched something, it was very hot. I felt a lot of pain, right? So my spinal nerve picked up that pain. It carried it to my dorsal root ganglion where my neuron is sitting. Okay, so can you see the neuron here? Now this axon of this neuron travels into the spinal cord through the posterior grey horn, through the dorsal root into the posterior grey horn, and it goes and relays into the neuron in the posterior grey horn. Remember, posterior grey horn is sensory. It's supposed to receive information. So it receives this information that there is pain. She has touched something which was very hot and the tip of her index finger has got injured. After receiving this information, the axon of this neuron now crosses the midline and begins to ascend upwards as a tract. What is it doing going upwards? It's going to tell the cortex, Baba, usko lag gaya hai, that her index finger is injured. Move the hand away. Isn't it? Suppose I touch a hot plate. Am I supposed to keep my finger there? Oh, this is hot. It's causing pain. Does it happen that way? No. What do? You touch it. Your brain registered pain. You move your finger away. Why do you move your finger away? Because your cortex then gives order through the anterior horn. It reaches that my hand and I move my hand away in milliseconds. That's how fantastic your central nervous system is. But who picked up the pain? The posterior horn neurons picked up the pain. They carried it up to the cortex in the form of a tract. That's how your cortex became aware that there was pain. Suppose this posterior horn is damaged, you will never know that your hand is being burning there. The plate is hot, your hand is getting damaged, and then you will look and you will see, oh my God, my finger is burnt. You didn't feel it because your posterior horn was damaged. Okay, this is how posterior horn neurons work. Right. Sometimes the grey matter is divided by some scientists into laminae. It's a modern concept, you must know about it. So it's divided into laminae 1 to 10, out of which lamina 2 corresponds to substantia gelatinosa, 3 to 6 correspond to nucleus proprius, or more the anterior horn laterally, which is lamina 9, corresponds to the motor neurons supplying the upper limbs, and so on. This is called laminar concept of Rickset. Right. So what did we do up till now? We spoke about anterior grey column, lateral grey column, posterior grey column. We learned to understand how anterior grey column works, lateral works, and how the posterior grey column works. Anterior and lateral being motor, posterior being sensory. So why the butterfly? Anybody? Because it's H-shaped. It's a butterfly-shaped grey matter. Nothing can stop me from bringing beautiful animals in my lectures. I genuinely believe that we on planet Earth are blessed because of their presence. Let's learn a lot from these creatures who live their life on following their rules, come what may. I find them precious and I'll always put them up in my videos, trying to ensure that you are also exposed to this beautiful part of our world. Okay, so we're done with the grey matter. See if you can recognize these nuclei. 1, nucleus proprius, lateral group of nuclei of anterior grey horn, medial group, and so on. So, or Clark's column, or nucleus, visceral afferent nucleus. So, more you revise, the more you will find yourself remembering. So, done with grey matter. So, I have to now go outwards. When I go outwards, what do I find? I find the white matter. Again, posterior median sulcus and septum, anterior median fissure help to divide your spinal cord into 2 halves of white matter. The 2 posterolateral sulci and the 2 anterolateral sulci divide each half of white matter into 3 funiculi: posterior funiculus, lateral funiculus, and anterior funiculus. Okay, so this is the basic of white matter. The 2 halves of white matter communicate through the ventral white commissure. The posterior funiculus is further subdivided with the help of a septum into fasciculus gracilis medially and fasciculus cuneatus laterally. As you can see, there is a spinal nerve attached to it from both sides, each spinal nerve having a dorsal root, ventral root, and a dorsal root, ganglion attached to the dorsal root, finally uniting to form one spinal nerve here. Okay, right. So what is this white matter? अगर grey matter में neurons है, if the grey matter contains neurons, what does white matter contain? White matter contains nerve fibers, of course supported by neuroglio and blood vessels. Because these white fibers are myelinated, they look white in color. And these white fibers are collected into what is called as tracts. With this, I am introducing a very important concept, a tract. What is a tract? Tract is a collection of white fibers, okay. But how come they are collected into one group? What is common about the group? They all have specific cell of origin, specific location in spinal cord, specific function, relaying in specific area in the central nervous system, okay. CLFT, specific cells of origin, specific location, specific function, specific termination in central nervous system. Such a bundle of fibers is called as a tract. Basically, they are telling the same story. If there is pain, they are telling pain. In the middle of that pain, they are not going to talk about vibration. Pain is pain. That's what they are going to carry. The tracts may cross or they may carry on the side on which they have been formed. Let's take a look. This is beautiful. I hope you enjoyed. Again, we go back to the same guy who felt pain, okay. The information was carried to the dorsal root ganglion neuron, from where it was carried to the posterior gray horn. Now what happens? The axons of neurons lying in the posterior gray horn cross to the opposite side and begin to ascend upwards. What are they carrying? They are carrying pain. Where are they taking origin? From the neuron in the posterior gray horn of spinal cord. And these fibers now begin to cross over. There are many neurons there. All of them are carrying the same modality of pain, and then they form a collection of fibers on the opposite side, as you can see, and this collection is called as a tract. What was our definition of tract? Common cell of origin in the dorsal root in the posterior gray horn, okay. Common cell of origin in the posterior gray horn. Location in spinal cord, lateral funiculus, common location. Function, carrying pain. Where are they terminating? At a common point in the central nervous system. That is why we call them a tract, okay. So, such a collection of fibers, one last time, which take origin from the same group of cells, which have the same location in spinal cord, which have the same function and terminate in the same area in the cortex, are referred to as a tract, okay. So, the spinal cord is divided into tracts that are going up to the brain and telling stories. Ye ho gaya, wo ho gaya, this happened, that happened. Cortex is very curious. What the hell is happening in the world? I want to know. So, everybody is going up to tell the story. These are called ascending tracts. And then the cortex says, I want to do something about this. This is not good, or whatever. So, the orders that are coming down from the cortex come down through descending tracts. So, your white matter is a collection of ascending and descending tracts, okay. So, there are a lot of tracts. I am going to show you only a few. I want you to remember only those in the beginning. So, first the ascending tracts. Fasciculus cuneatus, fasciculus gracilis, posterior spinocerebellar, anterior spinocerebellar, lateral spinothalamic, anterior spinothalamic, spinotectal, all going to the brain telling tales, okay, telling the brain the story, okay, what is happening outside. Now, what does the brain do? Gives an order, okay. These are descending tracts. Lateral corticospinal, rubrospinal, olivospinal, lateral vestibulospinal, tectospinal, anterior corticospinal. See, they're all ending with the word spinal. This is how your brain controls you, tells you to do an action, descending tracts. Now, here's an image which is a little different because I've got both the tracts in the same diagram. This side is showing you ascending tracts, this side is showing you descending tracts. Okay, let's revise them once. Fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, anterior posterior spinocerebellar, lateral anterior spinothalamic and spinotectal. On this side I am showing you lateral corticospinal, rubro, olivo, vestibulo, tecto and corticospinal tracts. remember, they are there on both sides. This is just for simplicity of drawing that I've shown you descending on one side and ascending on the other. Remember, they are present on both sides. Okay? Please pause the video here and draw this diagram once, maybe twice for practice. Then only go ahead and remember, these are the tracks you should study if you want to know your spinal cord. This is minimum. You can know more, but you cannot know less than this. So all these are the tracks you should know by the time you finish the study of spinal cord, right? Finally, a central canal, two lines. In the center is a central canal lined by ependyma containing CSF. Superiorly, it's continuous with the fourth ventricle in the brainstem. Inferiorly, it is continuous with something called as a terminal ventricle, which is a very slight dilatation in the central canal at the lower tip of the spinal cord. So, white matter, we just discussed how there are 3 funiculi, it shows attachment of spinal cord and so on. Okay, just revise this white matter once to remember that white matter essentially means tracts. You have to know ascending tracts, you have to know descending tracts. That's how you will actually learn how your spinal cord functions and keeps you functioning. So that's our lecture for today, which consisted of discussion on grey matter, discussion on white matter and discussion on central canal. How does grey matter work? How does white matter work? How do they work in conjunction with each other? And finally, what is central canal? That's today's lecture. Students, I instruct all of you, I'm not requesting you, I'm instructing all of you to see all these lectures. These are very beautiful way of learning your spinal cord well, understanding it. It will help you in anatomy and physiology. It will also help you in your senior years when you will be dealing with spinal cord lesions. Okay, all the links for all these lectures are given in the description section. Students, if you're liking my lectures, do like and subscribe to my channel, and please do send some comments so that I'll know whether these lectures are helping you or not. I also am putting up a lot of MCQs on my website. Do solve those MCQs. Obviously, there is no charge for it. The only thing I expect from you is go ahead knowing your subject. Don't go ahead because you want to pass. Forget it. Just study and move ahead so that you become knowledgeable doctors. Okay? So, feel free to call me in case you have doubts. It will be my pleasure to help you out. Alright students, I loved taking this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it too.